at the point where we're at, where I'm going to start reading, Jesus has already met with his disciples, and the crowds have gathered. And he has ministered to the crowds all day long. The day is getting towards the end, and it is time for them to go home, but yet it's getting late and they haven't eaten. And so Jesus tells his disciples, says they need to eat. And his disciples look at each other and, perplexed about what to do. And they says, but, we don't have enough money, even if there was some place where we could go buy food. And when they pool all the resources, they find out they have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And, that's not going to feed anybody. But Jesus says, have them all set down. Have them all set down in groups, and then we're going to bless it, and you're going to start passing it out. Now, just put yourself in the disciples' frame of mind at this point. All day long, you have been trying to protect your master from all these people that are around, because everybody wants a piece of him. Everybody wants to see how close they can get. Everybody wants to, a special word or just a private moment. And so they are just worn out from that. Then you get, your master tells you, says, all right, there's 5,000 men plus their wives, plus their children, and you've got a sack lunch. Go feed them. And I'm sure everybody goes, oh, let me go first. Instead of, probably what they were doing is, how this is going to work out. So you just, just completely perplexed. He's lost his mind here at this point. But somehow or another, they start passing out that bread and those fish, and they not only feed everybody, but they have enough leftovers to fill 12 baskets. And, I'm the type of person that I'd be sitting there going, how did he do that? How did he do that? Where did all this come from? Was there a private stash someplace that we didn't know about? How did he do that? And I think that a lot of times that the disciples lived in a constant state of, how did he do that? And I would have been I'm the type of person that likes to try and figure it out. If I go into a new building or something, I look at it and try and figure out how they built it. When I tear something apart, I want to study how they put it together the first time. And that's basically how I've taught myself to do carpentry work, was by tearing stuff apart and seeing how it was put together originally, and then see if there's something new that could be improved on to make it a little better. And so I'm sure that these guys were pretty much in the same boat, going, how does he do that every time? Let's pick up with verse 22. And it says, and immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side, while he sent the multitudes away. And after he had sent the multitudes away, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. And when it was evening, he was there alone. But the boat was already many stadia away from the land, battered by the waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the 4th watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were frightened, saying, it is a ghost, and they cried out for fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, take courage, it is I, do not be afraid. And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. And he said, come. And Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came towards Jesus. But seeing the wind, he became afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and took hold of him and said to him, O you of little faith, why did you doubt? And when they got into the boat, the wind stopped. And those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, you are certainly God's Son. You just got through feeding all this multitude of people, the disciples had to be exhausted. Jesus had to be exhausted, just physically wore out. I mean, not only are the disciples trying to protect Jesus all the time and watch out for him and care for him, and then minister to the people as well, but you got to keep in mind that they walked every place they went. And if they were in a boat, they rowed. So they didn't have an easy life. So whenever the day was through and after everybody had been fed and had gathered up all the leftovers and everything, it says that Jesus tells his disciples to get in the boat and go over to the other side. And then he sends the multitudes away. And after everybody had left, and after everybody had started on their way home, it says Jesus went to the mountains to be by himself, to pray, talk to God, and just spend some downtime all by himself. And then after he had spent the time and got refreshing spiritually, physically, it says he came back to where he had put the disciples in, and it says they were many stadia away. A stadia was 600 feet. So 600 times many, I don't know how far that would be, but it's apparently quite a ways. But it says it was from about 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock in the morning. And while he was on the mountain praying and visiting with God, the disciples were out in the boat fighting the waves because the wind had come up and the waves were coming up, and they were scared to death for their life. And where was Jesus? He wasn't there. Not that they probably thought that he could do much good anyway, but misery loves company. But there they were. And so they're wore out, they're scared, and it's just starting to get just a hint of light, and you start seeing somebody walking across the water on the sea. This is the point in your life where you say, I don't believe in ghosts, but that just changed my mind. And that's what they was afraid of. This is a ghost. And maybe they thought that they were seeing, that this was it, that they were entering into another realm of life. Whatever it is, at any rate, Jesus hears them, understands what's going on, and he says, don't be concerned. It's I. Do not be afraid. And Peter, out of those 12, everybody knows the story, Peter says, Lord, if that is really you, in other words, I have my doubts, but if that is really you, command me to come to you on the water. And what did Jesus say? One word. Come. Just come. And Peter got up out of the boat and started walking towards him. Had his eyes fixed on Jesus. But somewhere along the journey of his walking, going towards Jesus, maybe he started marveling at the water he was walking on. Maybe the waves were hitting him in the face, and so he started refocusing on the waves instead of who he was going to. And he was losing sight of what he was out there for and started seeing the surroundings that were all around him. And as we all know, he begins to sink. And as soon as he starts to sink, he cries out, "Oh, Lord, save me." And Jesus stretched out his hand, pulls him back up, and they get back into the boat. Now then, what's this got to do with us? How many's planning on walking on water here and anytime soon? I'm not. There is an old joke about the 3 ministers that go out and the 2 that go out fishing all the time in the boat, and they brought the new guy along, and after they get out into the boat, and one of them says, he says, I left something in my truck, I better go get it, and he gets out of the boat and walks across the water, gets whatever it is out of his truck, and comes back and gets in. After he gets in, the second one comes along, he says, I left my favorite lure in the tackle box in the boat. So he gets out of the boat, walks across the water, gets his lure, comes back and gets in. The new preacher who was there thought, well, if they can do it, maybe I can too. So he makes up some lame excuse, gets out of the boat, sinks right immediately. And the other 2 look at each other and says, think we ought to show him where the rocks are at? But we don't have any plans of walking on water. So what's this got to do with us? I want us to look at this from the simple perspective of the commands of Christ. You know, we talk about how hard it is sometimes of living a Christian life because there's all these rules and all these regulations and all this, and this is how the world a lot of times sees Christianity, as just a bunch more the things that have to be done. But I want us to look at the command of Christ. Jesus was walking across the water. He is performing a miracle. The disciples were in a terrible situation, and they cry out to Jesus, and Peter says, you know, Lord, if that's you, just command me to come to you. And he just says one word. The command is just one word. Come. How hard is that to understand? I mean, that's one of the commands that you first teach your dog whenever you're trying to train your dog. Come, sit, stay. Not complicated at all. But it was so simple that once Peter got out of the boat and actually was following the command, then he forgot what he was doing and started looking at everything else that was going on around about him. And he lost sight of his purpose, which was to come to Jesus. And that's when he started to sink. You know, what brought this all up this week, I was, well, let me put it this way. How many times whenever you're driving down the road, unless you've got Sirius radio or something like that, and you drive out of the coverage area of the station you're listening to, and so then you just hit another button, and so that you can have the radio on. So I was driving along the other day, radio started getting all fuzzy and staticky and everything, and I had been enjoying the music, but it switched, so I just switched over to one of the local stations, just happened to be country music. And immediately, I started realizing that, through the gospel music that I was listening to, that there's a lot of messages about people who are hurting, but people who are finding strength, and they're finding guidance, and they're finding forgiveness, and they're finding help through Jesus Christ. And they're praising God because he is an awesome God, and he's bigger than all their problems. But then whenever I switched from that station over to the country music that, I used to listen to all the time, hurting people there too. The only difference was that they turned from whenever they hurt, they turned to lust and to alcohol, which caused more problems, which led them back to lust and alcohol, which the only thing it actually led to is more country music. You ever heard people talk about, their life's in just such a mess and everything, and you listen to it for a while and you think that would make a good country song, because it has no real purpose or has no real ending. It just keeps going on and on and on. And I'm not being critical of that. What I'm trying to point out is that no matter where you're at in life, no matter what you believe in life, we all have a source or a power that we try to go to for answers. Now, it may not be the right one, but we all seems like we tend to gravitate towards a source that we think is going to help us. The last verse in the book of Judges says that in those days there was no king, and so everybody did what was right in their own mind. Does that sound familiar today? I mean, look at all of the different philosophies, all the different thought processes, all of the different alternate, whatever you want to call it, that's going on today, and it's just they're doing what they think in their own mind is right with no real standard to go by. And Jesus has made it so simple because He didn't come to complicate us. He didn't come to make us burdened down, but he came to free us from those burdens because he knows that there's going to be times in every one of our lives to where we're struggling. He also knows that there's going to be times in our lives where we're rejoicing. But the focus should be the same, irregardless of which that is. Jesus says, come. You want to walk on water? There's a storm all around you. Don't matter. Come. Just keep your eyes on me. Come. No biggie. Come. You go outside, call your, hey, Rover, where are you at? No. Come here. Come on. Come on. What's his? So simple. Jesus has used some commands that I just wanted to point out to you today that are just as simple as the command that he put in that one, and that is to come. Would you, girls, would you hit the next slide on that? Jesus also said in Mark chapter 10, verse 14, he says, permit the children to come to me, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. All right, he told Peter, come. Just come. Now then he's telling us, permit the children to come to me. Pretty simple, isn't it? I mean, when you stop and think about it, it's pretty simple. Next one. Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. See how simple that can be? Now then, what makes it complicated? What makes it complicated is whenever we start trying to put all the other pieces that really don't even need to be in there. How's he doing this? How are you going to do this? Notice that out of the 12, only one of them got out of the boat. All right. Of the others that were still in the boat, how many of them watched Peter get out and thought, he'll never make it? And then as soon as he started walking, how many of them says, I wish I'd have went with him? And then as soon as he started to sink, I'm sure that there were some of them that says, yeah, I knew it. You know. There was no way he could do it. But yet, whenever Jesus took him by the hand and brought him up, and he says, oh, you have little faith. Why did he have little faith? He had just walked on water. His faith sank whenever he took his eyes off of Jesus. When he took his focus off of who he was coming to, who he was supposed to be following, and started looking at everything else, that's whenever his faith wavered. But when they got into the boat, all of them said, this surely is the Son of God. This surely is. Why? Because he walked on water and because he calmed the storm? Maybe. What about the 5,000 men plus women and children he just fed not just a few hours ago? What about the multiple healings that he had performed all this time? That didn't convince them. But walking on the water and getting into a boat and the storm calming down, all of a sudden, they decided, well, this surely is the Son of God. What about all that other stuff? Have you ever noticed that whenever you look back at what you've already been through and come through, that then you can see where God's hand was in it? But yet, while you was going through it, you just couldn't see it. And you know why that is? Speaking personally, because I was too busy looking at the waves, I was too busy looking at the water, I was too busy looking at the storm, I was too busy looking at everything except for what God was trying to show me. Last one, girls. And behold, I am coming quickly. Blessed is he who heeds the words of the prophecy of this book. This is not rocket science. This is not some storybook. Jesus has fulfilled every prophecy that was ever written about him. Not most of them, not part of them, but every one of them. And then he says, I'm coming back. I'm coming back. And I know where everybody wants to be whenever he comes back. But I also know that if we're not on the right journey, or if we're not looking at the right thing, we may not be there. The instructions are simple. The difficult part is keeping the focus. You know, honestly, most of us are probably ADHD when it comes to Christianity. You know, we like the benefits. We like whenever things are going good, but whenever the storm comes up, you know, we're just looking for answers every place else. And we want to turn to God, but it just seems so difficult. It seems like that, you know, you open up the whole book and it's just, you know, where do I start? There's just so much in there. Jesus simplified it to Peter. He simplified it for the children. He simplified it for the weak and heavy laden. He simplified it for those who are wondering if there really is a second coming or not. And he said, come. Just come to me. One direction. Just come. Just come. And let me take care of the storm. Let me take care of how you're going to get there, whether it's walking on water, whether it's going in a boat, whatever the storm. Just come to me. Just come. And it's not always going to be a storm you're going through. It may be great times you're going through. But to come. The one thing that country music does is it just repeats itself. Bad behavior. It, you know, if he or she looks good enough, it's got to be love. Especially if you add enough alcohol into it. You know, I think it was Mickey Gill years ago who wrote that the girls all get prettier at closing time. And there's been, I don't know how many songs written about who they woke up with was not who they thought they were going with to start with. And so what do? They turn back to the same thing that got them back into trouble, and they repeat the cycle over and over again, expecting different results. Gospel music says, I don't always have the answers, but I know who to go to. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but I know who will deliver me. I know who made the stars in the sky. I know who made the earth and the heavens and everybody else. That's who I go to. So when Christ says, come, let's see if we can get ourselves out of the way and quit focusing on everything else that's going around and just step out. Not to be performing a miracle of watch this, but that's what he said to do. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's just come. And I guarantee when we look back, we're going to realize that God was in it. So many things that we have all been through, that we have lived through, we survived through, we struggled through, and then whenever you get through it, you go back and you realize, you know, if God hadn't have done this, this would have never happened. And there was no other explanation why this happened other than God. The disciples, when they saw Jesus hanging on the cross, they had to think, now he's done it. This just does not make any sense whatsoever. He came on his own to be arrested. He came on his own with the power of God, and he didn't even fight the crucifixion. He never put up a struggle. He even stopped us from trying to fight for him. And he went as helpless as a sheep going to slaughter. Why in the world would anybody do that? But just a few days later, they were able to see that it all had a purpose. Didn't make sense at the time. But God knew what he was doing. Christ knew what he was doing. And what he was basically doing was setting himself up so that he could offer to each one of us to come. Your sins have been forgiven if you'll just come. I'll take you to where I'm going if you'll just come. One of these days, I'm coming back. Won't you come? This morning as we've gathered here for worship, hopefully something in this has encouraged you, something has spoken to you. But if nothing else, just be reminded when the storms are howling to follow the simple instruction of Christ. Come. As we stand to sing the hymn of invitation this morning, God's speaking to your heart.